cool to see what you're going to face. You don't really know what to prepare for. There's not like, I mean, you could like focus on Kashtira, target that deck and try to play an anti-Kashtira deck, ninjas, for example. But you could also just kind of have like a wide variety of strategies that will counter a lot of decks. We've seen a lot of people using like Branded, trying to use Branded's Expulsion just to summon a monster to their opponent's side of the field that would prevent them from special summoning. Ibly's a big card we've been seeing a lot of this weekend, where you're able to give it to your opponent, and then that's going to be able to turn off. If they're playing Kashtira, they're not going to be able to summon monsters from their hands, and it's really hard to get off the field for a lot of decks. So definitely a lot of interesting strategies going into a wide open format, as opposed to when you might be a little more focused on the decks that have been doing well previously.
Even previously popular cards like Forbidden Droplet are not effective because when a Rise Heart's on the field, you can't even activate.
Yeah, that's always been the rough part with Droplet for me, is when like I have to banish the cards that are going to the graveyard and I can't use it. That's like probably the one downside of Forbidden Droplet, having to send the cost to the graveyard. So something we talk about the Kashtira deck, we're talking about Forbidden cards, Forbidden Lance. That's one of my favorite cards in the Kashtira deck right now. If I had to guess, people playing that in the Kashtira, if you have that Rise Heart, Lance it to protect from anything, oh man, that's tough to deal with. You need like a Lava Golem or maybe a Kaiju of some sort.
Yes, that card is certainly a throwback. So it's seeing play again, which is one of the most exciting things, really, I think, of the last couple of weeks, now that we've seen Photon Hypernova take effect, some of those old cards. And it really is exciting when a card that's been around for 10 plus years and seemingly fallen off the face of the earth in terms of competitive play suddenly become viable again.
All right. Looks like we're going to be starting here at Table A. We're going to be seeing Christian Urena taking on Michael. And it's a Kashtira mirror match. I think we might see a decent amount of that this weekend. So it looks like G moved away from the tier limit strategy now that the Forbidden List went into effect and has moved on to Kashtira.
I will be very interested in seeing which players actually bring tier elements in general to this weekend, whether or not it's a devoted strategy or sort of embedded into another strategy like Branded. But certainly seeing Kashtira is going to be something that we see quite a bit this weekend.
Yep, and let's see, it looks like Michael is going to be starting off first, and he's leading off with the card he wants to lead off with. It's Kashtira Unicorn. Since he controls no monsters, he's able to special summon this card from the hand, and then once per turn, he can add a Kashtira spell from the deck to the hand. Imagine he's going to grab that new secret rare out of Photon Hypernova, Kashtira Theosis, and it does, in fact, look like the card he adds.
Yeah, this deck is really consistent at doing just this between Pressured Planet and actually just opening Unicorn itself in combination with cards like Pot of Prosperity. This deck is incredibly consistent at doing this entire play.
Yep, that is very true. And here we see the Theosis is going to target that Unicorn, and now he can special summon another Kashtira monster of a different attribute from his deck. But for the rest of the turn, he'll be only able to special summon Xyz monsters from the extra deck.
Which is not much of a limitation in this particular strategy.
Certainly not. You won't be able to link away your Ibly anymore, but that's about the only downside. And now it looks like Fenrir is going to use his effect. Once per turn, Fenrir will let you add a Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand. Probably going to go after another new card out of Photon Hypernova, and well, not the one I thought he was going to grab, but it is Scareclaw Kashtira, it looks like. It looks like... All right, so he uses the Theosis, he has the Fenrir and the Unicorn. G might have some more secrets into his deck list than we previously realized. This may not be a pure Kashtira mirror match, but it looks like he didn't add the Rise Heart here because he already had Kashtira Rise Heart in his hand. That's an ultra rare out of Photon Hypernova.
We'll now get to see, more than likely, our first of probably many copies this weekend of Kashtira Shangri-La.
This card is incredible. As cards get banished face down, it'll lock your opponent out of being able to use the monster zones. It has built-in protection, and just for the bonus, special summon a Kashtira during every standby phase.
It also looks like he has Pressured Planet. Is that what that is? It looks like it is.
Pressured Planet Wraithos.
That card is an incredibly powerful card. It's not integral in all of the combos, but when you actually open with that with Shangri-La, it allows you to do some interactions to your opponent's standby phase that actually can add materials underneath your Rise Heart. So it'll be really curious to see whether or not we get to that point.
Yep, the Wraithos added tier limits Kashtira, and now he's using the Rise Heart effect to turn it into a level 7 and banish a Kashtira card from his deck, and he's going to banish Kashtira Big Bang. He's going to lock out that zone. Now Big Bang is going to activate, adding Kashtira Fenrir to his hand, and then allowing him to special summon that Kashtira Fenrir from the hand if he so chooses, and he does. He wants that Fenrir on the field for the protection. And now, since he triggered the effect of Shangri-La, he's going to be able to trigger the field spell, targeting Shangri-La to destroy it. And now Shangri-La protects itself from being destroyed by card effects by detaching material.
And he's going to use that now to be able to banish the Unicorn from his graveyard and able to summon Tier Element, Kashtira. I'm choosing not to activate the effect.
Now he's going to special summon Scareclaw Kashtira. Scareclaw Kashtira and Kashtira Tillaments both have similar effects. Instead of not having to control monsters to special summon, you just have to banish a monster of the theme within their name. So a Scareclaw or Kashtira for the Scareclaw Kashtira, or a Tillaments and a Kashtira for the Tillaments Kashtira. And a second Shangri-La is coming down here. You said we were going to see a lot this week, and we're already seeing 2 on the first turn.
And now we see Diabolos the Mind Hacker. Another one of those cards that has been around for a while, maybe looking for a home.
Debuted as a YCS prize card, yeah. Hopefully we get to see some ultra rare copies out here this weekend of some dedicated duelists who truly love Kashtira. But he is going to trigger the effect of Diabolos. This is going to be banishing cards and locking out zones. These 2 cards, the Shangri-La and Diabolos the Mind Hacker, just work so well together.
It's really amazing how they both happen to be level 7s, too, that really fits just so well together.
Yep,
cards released probably 5+ years apart.
Oh, yeah, so far apart. And it looks like G has seen enough. Instead of revealing any part of his strategy, he doesn't want Michael to check his extra deck at any point. So he's going to be able just to concede because he knows he's going to probably end up being locked out of all his zones with 2 Shangri Iras face up just like that. So G, despite winning the Team YCS last weekend, is going to take a Game 1 loss.
That's an interesting decision point that I think a lot of players, the more they play against decks like this, really need to consider, which is if your opponent plays a card that enables you to look at your extra deck, and it's pretty evident that you're going to lose all your monster zones, is there a benefit in conceding the game in order to go into game 2 and 3 with the unknown as to what you are playing, which here clearly Christian decided that was the best decision.
Yeah, certainly. It's going to be interesting. So that even though it looks like they're playing similar decks, they definitely have different strategies and thoughts going into this. So we'll have to see how Game 2 is going to play out. Obviously, who wins? A lot of the talk about this format is going first, and Game 1 is huge. A lot of decks can do a lot turn 1 with very little, especially Kashtira, just needing the Unicorn really to get things going. And then if you have those other copies of the Kashtiras in your hand, you're able to do plays like we saw Michael just do. But what do you think G's going to be looking at going into side decking in Game 2?
Well, I mean, his deck, I think, is really well suited for going first. I think every Kashtira deck has that sort of underlying advantage. Looking over his side deck, I mean, he could potentially put in some copies of... Honestly, looking at his side deck, I don't really see many cards that I necessarily want to. A lot of his side deck choices are actually really geared towards going second.
I like that strategy. Because I just mentioned going first is so huge. So you dedicate your deck to go first and just rely on your side deck for going second when you know you're going to be going second into that next game.
He has, copies of the triple tactics cards, but, generally speaking, if your opponent's not playing a lot of hand interruptions, which Kashtiras generally don't play an exhaustive amount of, it doesn't really line up as well. So I think, honestly, he may go into the second game with a construction very similar to his deck after Game 1. And hopefully, there are some really spicy main deck choices here in Christian's deck. I'm really hoping we get to see not only the fact that it's a Kashtira deck, but actually see the entirety of some of the cards that he's including, because this has already sort of verified one of the questions that I had going into the weekend.
Yeah, the deck he's playing is definitely something similar to what I kind of put together right after I saw the FNL list. I was like, you know what, I'm going to try and push the limits on what I can do with these 2 strategies combined. But we'll have to see if it's going to pay off. At least losing Game 1, you're able to concede so quickly, you don't have to worry about time. There's only 7 minutes taken off the clock, and they're already done side decking, ready to get into Game 2. And it looks like Christian is going to be going first.
I guess the only thing to note is he could potentially choose to go second with this really robust going second. Side deck, that is, I guess, theoretically an option, kind of looking at what he would put in going first and really not seeing many options.
I think that strategy is not bad either because...
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah. You have the Kashtira, the board breakers are the best way to deal with Kashtira, and if you just let someone side in all their board breakers and then you go first, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah, open up as many lava golems as you want, you're going first. But speaking of opening up, we see Christian here opening up with Kashtira Fenrir. I'd say, maybe perhaps before Photon Hypernova, that would be the ideal opening. In this case, you much more prefer opening Unicorn, but it does depend on sort of the makeup of his entire hand as to whether or not this is going to enable him to do a nice first turn combo.
Very true, and it looks like he's going to grab that Kashtira Rise Heart and add it to the hand. Taking a moment to consider his next move. Definitely, I think you touched on it. You normally before Photon Hypernova, leading with Fenrir is just ideal. It's just a free monster on the field. You're getting another copy. It has some form of disruption, but yeah, Unicorn definitely taking that slot of the one you want to lead with. And maybe he's hard drawn Theosis. Well, you can pretty much guess he doesn't have Pressured Planet Rathos because he would have probably started with that. But he has Birth, which is going to let him normal summon a level 7 monster.
Okay, so we actually did have Unicorn. That's an interesting sequencing there. Maybe perhaps trying to see whether or not the Kashtira Fenrir could bait out a copy of something like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, enabling him to just then follow up with Birth and Unicorn, and then enabling him to go into his combo that way.
Smart, very smart. And it looks like he added Kashtira Theosis off of that Unicorn.
You know, sometimes you might default into just seeing Unicorn in your hand and thinking, great, I opened what is perceived to be my best opening play, but looking at the entire makeup of your hand and maybe perhaps trying to target some of the things that Michael may have, sequencing it in a slightly different way actually gets to the exact same route, but also enables you to play around cards like Ash Blossom and potentially Infinite Impermanence.
Yeah, that's like the benefit of playing something like Kashtira Birth, right? When you're able to open up with, like, it's essentially an extender in the Kashtira deck because you're able to normal summon a monster after you've already special summoned monsters when you're normally not able to. So it kind of works as like gaining an extra summon for your Kashtiras, even though it's just your regular normal summon. Definitely a fantastic card to help play around those cards that get out of the hand. And now it looks like Christian is going to overlay for Shangri-La and going to probably use Rise Heart's effect next. And probably going to banish Big Bang here.
Assuming that he didn't draw what is usually a singleton copy.
It's also going to banish the top 3 cards of Michael's deck face down. And that will trigger the Shangri-La to remove his own. Ooh. We both saw the shifter there, right?
That is an interesting inclusion. You know, going into this matchup, we didn't really talk about what Michael's going to side because he's truly siding totally blind, not seeing a single card from Christian's deck after the first game.
So we're already seeing the benefits of not revealing what you're playing.
Yes, Dimension Shifter is actually a card that the Kashtira deck just plays by default under most circumstances, or at least a large percentage of players elected to incorporate that either in their main and certainly in their side deck prior to the Forbidden and Limited list. Michael's electing here to side deck 3 copies, and then going into blind, he decided to put it in, going second. Now he's hedging against some of the potential strategies.
My hand. And I use this and this to banish this. What would you do here after? I haven't used this to summon back yet.
So the one benefit of playing in the 3v3 YCS is you do have like your friend right next to you. You don't want to bother them too much because they're playing their own games, but you do have the opportunity to ask questions amongst the person sitting next to you and see maybe what they would do. What do you think? And
No.
This is still, relatively speaking, a newer strategy, at least with the cards released in Photon Hypernova. And if you were an Adamant Tier Element player prior to the Forbidden and Limited list, your experience and sort of the intricacies could be exclusively in those strategies, which means you've only had about a week or so, especially if under the show's Christian actually played last weekend. It's not like he was able to immediately begin testing for this event. So you can understand some degree of familiarity with a deck like Tier Element would be of benefit to him, but with the new Forbidden and Limited list,
Either one, right?
he might need to rely a little bit more on his teammates.
very true, and they always got their back. That's one thing I like about the team YCS. Not that you could have fun with your friends. There's something about playing with your friends when it doesn't feel as bad when you lose. But it looks like he's going to use Theosis, targeting the Fenrir to summon Scareclaw Kashtira from the deck. Or sorry, Tearlaman's Kashtira. And that's going to send 3. Ooh, King of the Swamp.
We see it.
Scream! He is using Tearlaman's Kashtira. He does have the one copy of all those Tearlament names in his deck. And we see Scream is going to probably add Tearlaman's Soliak.
Yep, he has Celiac and Metanoid. So what's interesting here is Michael on the first turn elected not to use the effect to send the top cards of your deck to the graveyard, whereas Christian, on the other hand, actually is quite a bit benefited by that effect. As you can see here, getting a free Scream effect. In addition to that, it also reveals that he's playing cards like King of the Swamp, which could impact some of his fusion plays going forward.
Yeah, the cool thing about King of the Swamp with the Kashtira deck is you can go into Draco Sack to Cherubini to send King of the Swamp. Then you link the Cherubini and the Draco Sack into Sprite Sprint. Sprint sends down the Tearlament, and then you can make a Winda, or not Winda, what is it, Grapha. Grapha's the one you make a lot of the times. The new Grapha has a structure deck. Or it's new Rainbow, sorry. Grapha's new general Rainbow. But definitely something cool.
Dragon Overlord of the Dark World.
There you go. Now he's going to overlay for Diabolus.
I have Metanoise, though.
Yeah, he added Metanoise. So another thing that's cool about Metanoise is it's really good against Kashtira. So it was not very good against the tier mirror match, but Kashtira, when you put their monster face down, they have basically a frozen part on the field. They can't Theosis, they can't keep summoning. Definitely strong.
And if you've already lost several of your monster zones due to Shangri-La, all of a sudden that monster face down on the field, it's almost adding an additional blank monster zone.
And I attach Big Bang, right?
Well, we have to resolve.
All right, so, and then
And that's another cool thing. So with a Rise Heart, you have Big Bang. You can detach his material. You banish it again to use his effect during your punch. You have to keep triggering the effect as every time you detach, it gets banished and will be triggered. Same thing with like Kashtira Theosis.
taking away his Big Eye. That's an exciting card, similar to Forbidden Lands that we now see with a resurgence in popularity now that Rank 7 XYZs have become popular again in the format.
Yeah, it's cool to see Big Eye around. So he's got 2 zones locked here. Now it looks like he's going to lock another one.
Looks like Michael elected to play a lot of 2-ubs in his extra deck, which is obviously one of the things that can sort of alleviate the effects either of Unicorn or Diabolos.
I already banished 4. And you have to attach. It's mandatory.
Attach again, right?
Yeah, it's mandatory.
It's 3.
So now we have Arise Art here with 3 materials. That's really the magic number that you're trying to get to when you're opening up with Kashtira, because now he'll have the quick effect ability to banish a card face down, which then will trigger again, shrink a lot, potentially locking out another zone.
During the draw phase, I'm going to activate Book of Eclipse.
Ooh, Michael does have the Book of Eclipse. Does Christian have something like Ash Blossom? He does! So the one downside of Book of Eclipse is it does include the effect to draw cards, so you can use Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring against it. So it's definitely a strong counter to one of the biggest counter cards to the Kashtira strategy.
Yes, we do see some players electing to main deck Ash Blossom. It isn't the case for Christian, a card that came out of his side deck, so we actually do get to see at least some of his side decking strategies. A card that may not intuitively be as beneficial going first, it actually works as a pretty important piece of interruption against cards like Book of Eclipse, and we see that that's actually going to be enough for Michael to concede here in Game 2.
Yeah, both players opening up strong in games 1 and 2 and pushing it to game number 3. We're going to have to see if that game is going to play out the same as game number 1. But you did mention, you know, a lot of side decks are more so geared towards going second. So G will have that option to have a more go second focus strategy, prepare for these zone lockouts, maybe have some sort of interaction from the hand, like Nibiru, the Primal Being is a good one. Unless you're playing against like Adventure Kashtira, Nibiru can usually touch down a lot if they're going for the zone lockout. As long as they don't lock out all your zones, you're still able to use Nibiru. But once all 5 are gone, you can't use Nibiru because you can't summon a monster when your zones are all locked out. But it's definitely a good card as before. You'll have plenty of opportunities usually before you get all 5 zones locked out to Nibiru.
One interesting thing about putting Ash Blossom after that first game is Christian obviously got to side with the advantage of Michael not knowing what he was playing. So it's not as obvious that a card like Book of Eclipse would actually even be in Michael's deck heading into game 2 or 3, especially because we saw him side Dimension Shifter. So Michael really did what I like to imagine as a hedging side deck plan, where Book of Eclipse is obviously really good against Kashtira, okay enough maybe against some other matchups, so it'll include in the deck because I'm playing Dark. And then in addition to that, Dimension Shifter, you're also kind of playing Dark or blind to what your opponent's playing. Can also be a cane breaker against a lot of strategies. So it's actually really interesting to see how these players side deck. Christian electing to put an Ash Blossom, which is reasonable against Kashtira in general, but also especially good against Book of Eclipse if Michael elects to keep that in his deck.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And so going second against Kashtira, the big thing you want to be worried about is probably Ibli, because I think a lot of Kashtira players are all playing Nightmare Corrupt with Ibli this weekend, because it just does so much for you in the mirror match. Like, not only do you, I mentioned how good Nibiru was, well, that turns off Nibiru because you can't special summon anything but Link monsters, and it puts a monster on the board that they can't get rid of easily, so they can't special summon their Kashtira monsters.
And we see, I think Christian is coming prepared with some side deck choices against Ibli. We'll see whether or not Michael actually elects to put in the Iblis, which he is in fact side decking, and whether or not Christian is able to counteract it effectively.
Yeah, it'll be good to see. I'm excited to see what these players have happening here going into game number 3. Like we talked about, that's like a huge advantage is just when you're able to go second. Even though you lost game 1 when you went second, game 3 you have your side deck cards. You have a lot more options, a lot more tools, a lot more ways to work through what your opponent is putting up. I'm more about, like, especially seeing like how Michael's playing his Kashtira deck. It seems like they're really focused on locking out the zones. That makes me more focused on the preventative. But yeah, I mean, Book of Eclipse is just absolutely one of the best cards this format. The last time I remember being like this good would be like during the Necros format, where you're just trying to book down the Colossus that has the Djinn ritual effect applied to it, a releaser of rituals.
And make it so your opponent was weak to Trishula, which required monsters to actually be on the field, or cards to be on the field for it to affect to resolve. So yeah, Book of Eclipse has actually come in and out of competitive play before. All of the book cards really in some capacity have seen competitive play. Book of Moon, sort of the original, Book of Taiyu, and some combo decks. Book of Lunar Eclipse even saw some play last weekend, and of course your Book of Eclipse. And obviously Book of Life somewhere in there too.
Yep, I do love the book cards. I mean, it's awesome seeing Book of Moon as a resurgence. Like, that's just an iconic card that's always been good. To be lately in the past few years kind of fallen out, not being able to be as impactful as it once was, but definitely still strong.
No better way to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than to have a card like Book of Moon see this much competitive play again.
Yep, for sure.
So it looks like they're just finishing up side decking here. It'll be really interesting to see now that the cat is out of the bag in terms of what Christian's playing. Not only did he reveal his Kashtira strategy, he also revealed the fact that he is in fact playing Tier Elements, which I think became very evident when he actually resolved Tier Element Kashtira's effect to send cards off the top of his deck to the graveyard, which is obviously something that is more advantageous in his strategy than maybe other strategies incorporating that card.
Yeah, the Tier Elements Kashtira is fantastic. Just another monster you can summon to the field. If it's sent, you get to send more cards from your deck to the graveyard. Upon summon, you send more, and it's just really fantastic. And like we've seen the synergy, even Kashtira needs to banish like Kashtira cards to summon Kashtira Tier Elements or the Scareclaw Kashtira. So definitely useful in every deck. And then, I mean, if you can hit something like Scream and get a free trap, why not? But it looks like they are just about finished shuffling each other's decks and now drawing their hands, and they're going to jump right in here to game number 3 of our first match of this round 1 at the Team YCS here in Las Vegas. I've been really excited about this weekend for a long time. I mean, you know, Photon Hypernova, new Forbidden List. It's nice when it all like kind of lines up where there's new sets, new format. You don't really know what to expect. It's a lot of exciting, but I mean, you kind of know you're going to expect some Kashtira. So we'll have to see how it actually does here this weekend, how dominant it will be, or if it will be one of the more targeted and focused down kind of decks. But that remains to be seen. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. It's game 3. Oh, look, we can look at the table scores updated. It looks like table B, Justin defeated Hani in the first game. So if Michael's able to win this game and Justin wins the next game, that will be the round.
Yep, they are the closer team to victory as of right now. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And Michael going first here, that could be a huge advantage depending on how well he opened, or if Christian has some of those counter cards, some of those board breakers, some of those really powerful spell cards, we might be in for a rude awakening here. So it'll be interesting to see.
See what Michael leads off with. It does he have? I see. Is that a reinforcement of the army? That's what it looks like to me.
It is. Yes.
He has unicorn. He has plenty of Kashtira monsters for sure.
Well, that's good. The first check is basically, do I have access to unicorn? And if not, do I have access to Fenrir plus Birth? Looks like that's going to resolve, which will allow him to search out a copy of Kashtira Birth.
Birth's a good one. It lets you normal summon level 7 monsters. It's actually good in like non-Kashtira decks because it just works for any level 7 monster. You can just summon without a normal summon.
I could imagine a universe someday where an additional level 7 strategy becomes popular enough, and perhaps that could be used as an extender. So looking over his hand, it looks like he already has a copy of Rise Heart. I think I saw a copy of Pressured Planet. Okay, here's Reinforcements of the Army.
The classic, we're talking about classic cards. Reinforcements, one of the oldest, going to add a warrior.
That looks like Crusadia Arborea.
Oh, it is Arborea. That's right. Oh, so I guess it's like to continue with Ibli, so you could you link your Ibli away and then you can special summon Arborea. That's interesting. I haven't seen people use Crusadia Arborea in Kashtira.
Yeah, this could be an interesting breakthrough in terms of the strategy.
Oh, it's a synchro. Oh, he's just going to synchro for 10. He's just going to synchro for Baron. Okay. I've seen that with Ash Blossom, but not with the Crusadia. Interesting.
Okay, and he did have Pressured Planet as well.
Yep. Now he has the Baron. Doesn't have to worry about that Nibiru. Doesn't even need the Ibli. Pretty cool play.
Now, we talked a little bit about, when you're playing first with Kashtira, some of the strategies that you have to worry about is obviously cards like Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, and those Book of Lunar Eclipse type cards. Well, obviously having Baron on the field is one of the ways that you can alleviate that. It is, however, something that is going to play into Lava Golem type effects, so it'll be curious to see whether or not Michael has an avenue of playing around both cards like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, but then also having a way of mitigating the effects of a card like Lava Golem if Christian has that card in his deck.
Certainly, and it looks like he's going to add Tier Elements Kashtira. Oh, it sounds like Justin may have won. It sounded like Michael was talking to his teammate there.
It looks like Justin is playing a pretty traditional-looking Sprite strategy. So another deck that had a limitation on the Forbidden Limited list by losing Elf was able to be victorious here in round 1.
That's pretty cool. Definitely Sprite still out there, despite that loss of Elf. And now it looks like Risehart is going to banish
Probably Big Bang.
Yep. And now Christian was going to lose the top 3 cards from his deck. Banish face down.
You banish 3. Chainlink 1, target the zone. Chainlink 2 to summon.
Yep, so he's going to lock out the zone. Big Bang, when it's banished, lets you take a material from one of your monsters and add it to your hand, and then you can special summon it if you so choose. And now he's going to banish a Kashtira or a Tearlaments card to summon Kashtira. Tearlaments Kashtira, and now it looks like he's going to be going for something similar to that play. I saw, oh, not going to be double, but he's going to go into a Risehart and then probably deal Bolus.
It's interesting. You don't technically have to summon up Big Bang, so with certain hands you can actually use it to give yourself follow-up for the turn after. Really sort of depends on how many extenders you have, to the extent of whether or not you actually need that effect.
Yeah, it's cool. It gives you some flexibility for sure.
This is interesting. In looking at Christian's extra deck, because he's incorporating this King of the Swamp Tear Element package, there's actually a lot more singletons, right? He only has, 1 copy, for example, of Kashtira or Risehart, only 1 copy of Kashtira Shangri-La. He actually is playing 15 singletons.
Can you come this side or no?
Justin, what do you think I banished from the extra deck? There's only 1 Zeus, there's 1 Mud Dragon, 1 Risehart. Probably just the Mud Dragon for Super Poly. Okay.
Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. Players have often, this format, even though it's relatively early, picked up on the fact that due to the Mind Hacker, you often need to play 2 copies of your most important extra deck monsters. Christian, because his deck is as broad as it is, incorporating the Tear Element package and the King of the Swamp's Polymerization package, is truly only playing 1 copy of everything. So when Michael gets to resolve that effect, he gets the full array of options.
Certainly, and it does sound like we did hear right. Justin did win at table B, so now if Michael is able to take this game, they will walk away with this victory over the champion from just last weekend.
It's interesting. He ended up taking Mud Dragon, which plays around Super Polymerization, which is a card that Christian is playing. It's interesting to the extent to which, in Christian's testing, players were in tune enough with the presence of Mud Dragon. It's almost enticing when you see 1 copy of the Kashtira XYZ monsters to take those instead, just because of how integral they are to the combo and to the strategy as a whole. Whereas a card like Mud Dragon is actually important when trying to return back with a card like Super Polymerization.
Yeah, certainly. Definitely heads up play here from Michael going after that Mud Dragon.
Main phase.
The main phase is fine.
Let's see what he can do about this board. Does he have a Book of Eclipse? Does he have a Winged Dragon of Raw Seer mode? Will the Ancient Beast in the Sky hear my cry and come down? We'll have to find out.
This triggers no matter what, right?
It is mandatory.
Missile Surge Dark Ruler.
Okay, I think he's talking about tasking. I heard him say this will search Dark Ruler, so that has to be tasking.
Okay, I'll chain this effect.
Dark Ruler
Target this.
So G activated Primal Planet.
Okay.
And now it got banished face down from a Risehart.
Do you have any trigger effects?
And that's going to chain Shangri. It's going to trigger Shangri-Ira and deal Bolus.
9 cards in your deck.
They're definitely talking about having a copy of Triple Tactics Thrust.
Yeah, brand new secret rare out of Photon Hypernova, a really cool one that's pretty scary for like branded players or in a lot of decks because you're able to add any Speller Trap, and if your opponent has a monster, if they activate a monster effect, and if they have a monster, you can use it that turn. So definitely really good. But you see G losing all 5 zones here, but he does have that thrust.
I'm curious to see what he searches. So what is happening here is actually really an amazing high-level play. Michael is afraid of Dark Ruler no more. Christian has actually said Dark Ruler no more out loud. There's no copy of Dark Ruler in his deck.
Is there a card that you can search that Baron can't negate? That's a normal spell? Or trap?
This one?
I mean, because I guess he already has a card that I can't negate. Yeah, I'll just negate it.
So this may be what Christian has actually wanted entirely. So I'm really curious to see what he's able to follow up on here, because that may have been the bait.
No, he has another one.
That's fine.
Since it says activate instead of use and negates the activation, he's going to be able to use another copy. This is huge. So basically got to bait out the Baron for free, and now he's going to be able to grab something like Book of Eclipse from his, or not Book of Eclipse, he's going to grab like, I don't know what he's going to be able to grab.
Change of Heart?
Oh, Change of Heart would be a good one.
Then I just draw 2. So it's like...
It looks like they're discussing getting Triple Tactics Talent. When I first read Thrust, I was like, oh, this card just adds Triple Tactics Talents, right? Because what is a card better than Pot of Greed, Change of Heart, and Forceful Sentry all in one?
And it's interesting in this particular matchup, Arise Art's effect is mandatory, so it's actually quite easy to get the triple tactics cards to be live, which is not necessarily always the case.
I don't think you can take. Can he take while he has no zones to take to? Okay.
Yeah, that is interesting. The zones are locked out.
I'm pretty sure it takes it and then like it goes to the graveyard because I don't have zones. But you double check to make sure.
Yeah, that might be right.
This is an interesting ruling question that I think a lot of people are going to have this weekend, which is when you activate Change of Heart or Triple Tactics Talent, what happens?
Yeah, I think you can't activate it, but I'm not completely certain. I know you can't activate Nibiru if all your zones are locked out because it would summon a monster, but this might be a little different.
I don't want to speculate, though I have heard
I'm okay with being
the
wrong.
opposite. I've heard it actually just the monster is sent to the graveyard by a game mechanic, but
now,
again.
see that I know that so it used to be if you had like I know if you had like 5 monsters and I activate enemy controller, tribute one of my monsters to take one of yours, and then I chain Call the Haunted to bring one of my monsters back. So then I have 5. The enemy controller resolves and it goes to the graveyard. Like that would be the scenario that I've referenced the most. But I don't know if you could ever activate enemy that whatever situation would come up because the enemy controller always tributes one of those monsters off your field. So
Yes.
this is a little different.
Enemy controller's original activation was legal.
But it might work this way still.
But this really was an interesting interaction here. Christian really needed the actual thrust to be negated by Barone, because if his hand is just multiple copies of thrust,
You're minus a card.
well, then he's going to search talents, but then the Barone is going to negate the talents. So by kind of alluding to the reality of Dark Ruler No More in its existence, kind of put the thought in Michael's head that he needs to negate it, because otherwise he'd be able to search Dark Ruler No More.
I mean, just not knowing what your opponent's playing, they could potentially have an option like that in the deck for sure. So it's definitely something to be weary of.
He took it.
Looks like, yeah, we're just taking a minute here to talk about the ruling. You know, maybe get an appeal, making sure they get the official how it's going to be ruled here this weekend. At least we'll know right here from the start, so the rest of the weekend we'll be able to resolve it quite easily. But this is, a cool start. We're starting off with the player who won the YCS just last weekend. But he didn't only just win the 3v3 YCS last weekend. He's won one before. I believe it was in Peru, maybe? And if I could be wrong. It was definitely a LATAM a Team YCS, but he's the only 2-time 3v3 or Team YCS champion that I know of for sure. So I'd be cool for him to win a third one here, and 1/3 plus 1/3 equals 1.
Plus, he recently won a remote duel YCS, so he
Oh,
sort of is
he
the
did.
master of these less frequent but nevertheless still prestigious YCS tournaments.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. I forgot about that remote tool. Yeah, during this past format when we had like tier elements of full power after, Power of the Elements, Darkwing Blast, we did see a lot of the same players doing well and winning multiple events like throughout that format.